He makes his living from testing employees for drink and drugs in the workplace. He's got clients from high street stationers to major food manufacturers. Civil liberties groups have criticised him. So how ethical is it? Joining us is Christopher Evans from Drug Aware in Derby, who, as I said, makes his living drug testing people. Christopher, good morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
You haven't had any special instructions with me, have you, at all this morning?
No, nothing so far.
You're welcome. I mean, you are welcome. You brought a big briefcase. Is that your box of tricks there that you've got with you?
It is indeed, yes. You always have goods with you prepared.
And what kind of things could you test? If somebody said to you, right, okay, actually, we want you to test Shane this morning, what could you test me for?
Well, using on-site test equipment, you can test for about 7 or 8 different drugs all in one go, and we have disposable or electronic breathalyzer units. But obviously in the workplace, these kind of things take time because you have to put a policy into place.
Right. So you can't, I mean, you're talking about people could lose their jobs potentially out of this, couldn't they? If they were driving machinery and you came in and tested them, that could be the end of their job, couldn't it, really, in a way? It's quite serious stuff, isn't it, you do?
Well, it is serious stuff, but the whole point of this kind of process is really all about deterrent. The amount of testing that actually goes on normally is very, very little. Even in a company where you do random testing, for example, which is the most extent of testing you would do, you only, say, testing 5% of the workforce randomly throughout the year. So the chance of any one person being tested is sort of, 1 in 20 people being tested, or being tested once every 20 years. So to use that to specifically target people is obviously not going to work, but the deterrent factor that comes from that is enormous. And because a policy takes several months to come into place, there is a sort of a cultural shift within any business where people gradually realise they're making sort of lifestyle choices every day. Do I smoke a joint round at a friend's house, or do I have a beer? They gradually make choices that are actually going to be more safe within the workplace.
Is it a deterrent, though, Christopher? Because, I mean, we have drug testing in the Tour de France. We have drug testing in the Olympics. I mean, day one of the Olympics, somebody was sent home for failing a drug test. It's quite clear the deterrent doesn't work. People still think they can beat it, don't they?
Well, with Olympics and various other sporting activities, people are often dealing with performance-enhancing drugs, whereas in the workplace it's more sort of recreational, so the driving force isn't the same. But if you look at some of the major case studies done, like with the US Navy, for example, they had upwards of 40% positivity when they first started, and just by testing, 1 in 20 people every so often, they brought their positivity rate down to less than 2% in under a year. So obviously the vast majority of people misusing substances were just doing it on a recreational basis, and they made alternative choices because they're aware there was potential consequence.
What's your background? I mean, how did you get into all of this?
I originally started out working in a forensics laboratory, and obviously doing that for several years, doing a lot of training in the voluntary testing units in the prison service, and working with a lot of other employers. Of course, you see the nature of the market, and you see the obvious need for it. I mean, a lot of these businesses have very dangerous environments, safety-critical environments, where people might be working at heights, or working with electricity, or with heavy lifting equipment, and the chance for just a very simple accident creating a lot of damage to property, or obviously injury or fatality, is very, very real.
All right, let's see if there's a downside to this, because Dr. Sean Gabb is the Civil Liberties Group Libertarian Alliance. Sorry, Sean, joins us on the show this morning. Hi, Sean. Good morning.
Good morning.
What's your take on all of this, then? Is this an erosion of civil liberties?
Well, we are sleepwalking at the moment into a gigantic surveillance state in which our lives are an open book, and this is just one more step. It's the privatised wing of the surveillance state. It is a gross interference with personal dignity to be dragged out of your workplace and made to provide a urine or a blood sample. I was somebody who regretted trade union militancy in the past, but my question now is, where are the trade unions? What are they doing to stand up for their members' rights?
What about the other side of the coin? If you were to get into a taxi, for example, wouldn't you like to know that the company that you were using makes sure that their employees are drug-free, or would you like somebody who's stoned out of his mind on a joint driving you around town? Do you know what I mean? When it comes to you using the service, isn't it a different perspective?
I've been using railways, taxis and services for about 30 years now, and I've never had that problem. People are not dangerous. You should trust people. Instead of treating people like children, you should trust them. Now, I accept that there may be an argument where airline pilots are concerned, or maybe even railway drivers, but this kind of drug testing is being extended throughout workplaces, and it will soon be hitting checkout staff in supermarkets. It may already be doing so.
But I mean, if you're somebody who works with somebody who's stoned out of their mind on dope all the while, and you're having to constantly do their job for them, wouldn't you like to think there was something in place that would protect you from that as well?
If somebody was drugged permanently in the workplace and I was having to do his job, that would come to the attention of the managers without the need for intrusive searches into people's bodies.
On page 9 of The Sun today, the High Seas is the headline. 18 sailors are held in the biggest Navy drugs bust. Scandal crew were guarding the Falklands. They're in charge of a Navy destroyer, and they're using cocaine. They're tested positive for cocaine and other recreational drugs as well. What do you think? Would they be an exception as well?
Not really, no, because if somebody is obviously incapable to do the job, they should be disciplined. What we're doing is we're randomly trawling through the workplace to see what people are doing in their private lives, and it's wrong. This is always presented as a solution to a gigantic problem. It is not a gigantic problem. Now, Christopher will adduce statistics saying that half of all accidents in the UK are caused by drink and drugs. I don't believe that. This is Soviet grain harvest statistics. You can get statistics to prove anything you want.
Absolutely,
if you're selective.
Yeah.
And if you press those statistics, dodgy extrapolations, junk science and so on.
What?
I do not believe that there is a big problem in this country with drug use in the workplace. Those problems which are present are manifest without drug testing. This is an invasion of people's personal dignity. It's another step towards the surveillance state. It should be resisted.
All right. Well, let's ask Christopher. What do you make of what Sean's saying? I mean, do you without bringing out the statistics of accidents? I mean, is it an invasion of people's privacy? People being dragged out of the workplace and tested?
Well, there's two sides of the coin, really. The unions were mentioned there, and of course, obviously you'd imagine then unions are defending their members, which is of course what they're doing. A lot of unions, including the TUC, endorse having some kind of policy in place. As long as welfare principles are in place so people can come forward to seek assistance, which is obviously the other side of the benefits of having a policy, they are fully behind this, because quite often unions are having to defend people who've then had a serious accident which has involved a lot of other people, because they were unfit to be doing the job they were doing through drink or drugs. So it's not always such a cut and dried process. You can't, of course, always rely on people's discretion to stay sober or to make sure they're not impaired from being out the night before, because, of course, inevitably, although people know the rules, they will still go ahead and sort of weigh up the difference between sort of the pleasure they get from going out and enjoying themselves to the safety in the workplace.
Because isn't that the question? Isn't it what happens after, Christopher? Isn't it? Is it if an employer uses it to sack people, or if an employer uses it to say, "I'm sorry, you've still got alcohol in your system, you now have to go home and you can't drive that truck for us today," that's different from saying, "I'm sorry, but you've been drinking and you've come in drunk and you're now sacked," is it? Or
it is, and there's a lot of sort of misconceptions about drug testing, in that people imagine random testing is the norm and the most common thing, when in actual fact, if any kind of testing is involved, most companies will just be doing testing in accident or incident situations, or where they have 4 cores, which is basically reasonable grounds. So if somebody's smelling of alcohol or has slurred speech or unsteady walk, or the obvious signs and symptoms, they will then take a precautionary test, or in the event of an accident, carry out a test, just try and rule out drugs and alcohol. But obviously, if that is involved, they can then address and deal with the actual problem ahead of the next occurrence, because leaving a problem like that just to carry on inevitably ends up with further accidents down the line.
Sean, as a final point to you, I mean, you mentioned some exceptions there: airline pilots, people who drive trains. You're worried about civil liberties. Who is going to be the person that decides who the exceptions are then? You?
I'm not sure that I like the idea of drug testing anywhere. I said I might be willing to make an exception. I'm not sure of that. The point is, as I said, we are walking towards a surveillance state. Every step of the way is prepared by glib and superficially persuasive propaganda. I don't believe it. I would expect trade unions to stand up for their members' rights. They obviously don't. And I suppose the question I would now ask is, where is Red Robbo and where is Arthur Scargill when you need them?
All right, we're going to leave it there. There's a couple of names from the past. Thanks for joining us, fellas, this morning. Do appreciate that. Christopher Evans from Drug Aware and Dr. Sean Gabb from the Civil Liberties Group Libertarian Alliance.